The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty building marked General Store and Post Office, and Helena Lawson pressed her hand against the worn leather seat to steady herself, knowing that if she stepped down onto this Arizona Territory street, there would be no turning back from the lies she'd told to get here. She'd answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride under false pretenses, claiming to be a widow seeking a fresh start when the truth was far more desperate. 3 weeks ago, she'd fled Charleston in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on her back and her grandmother's silver locket, running from a man who'd claimed ownership of her future the moment her father's gambling debts had come due. Vernon Blackthorne had purchased those debts along with what he considered his right to her hand in marriage, and when she'd refused, his threats had turned violent enough that her own mother had secretly given her the fare for a train west. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Piñon, Arizona Territory, in this summer of 1882, and Helena could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the high-necked traveling dress that marked her as a woman from back east. The town consisted of perhaps 24 buildings lining a single main street, with the purple-shadowed Piñon Mountains rising in the distance like sentinels guarding secrets. Dust devils danced between the structures, and she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. "Miss Lawson." A weathered man in a clerk's visor peered at her from the doorway of the post office. "You the lady expected at the Turner Ranch." Helena's throat went dry. Xavier Turner, the rancher who'd placed the advertisement seeking a practical woman of good character to manage his household and eventually become his wife. She'd written to him using the address of a friend in Richmond, painting herself as a 22-year-old widow with domestic skills and a desire for the simpler life of the Western Territories. All of it true enough, except for the widow part and the fact that she was running for her life. "I am," she managed, lifting her chin with a confidence she didn't feel. "He'll be along shortly. Said to watch for the Wednesday stage." The clerk gestured to a bench in the shade. "You can wait there, miss. Probably want some water after that journey." Helena accepted gratefully, sinking onto the bench and taking the dipper of cool water he brought from inside. Her hands trembled slightly as she drank, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. She was safe here. Vernon Blackthorne would never think to look for her in a tiny territorial town in Arizona. She'd covered her tracks carefully, using her mother's maiden name for the train tickets and paying cash for everything. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, and her breath caught as a man rode into view on a magnificent chestnut horse. He sat tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone born to the work, his broad shoulders filling out a dust-covered shirt, and his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. As he drew closer, she could make out strong features tanned dark by the sun, a straight nose, and a firm jaw covered with several days' worth of dark stubble. He looked to be perhaps 28 or 30, with the kind of solid, capable presence that suggested a man who kept his word. Xavier Turner dismounted with fluid grace and looped his horse's reins over the hitching post before turning his attention to her. His eyes were a startling blue-gray in his sun-darkened face, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. She stood, smoothing her skirts with damp palms. "Miss Lawson." His voice was deep and rough as gravel with an accent that suggested Texas origins. "Xavier Turner, welcome to Piñon, Mr. Turner." She extended her hand and he shook it gently, his palm calloused and warm. "Thank you for meeting me. You had a good journey." He released her hand and she felt the loss of that warmth despite the heat of the day. "Long but uneventful," she said, which was true enough. The 3 weeks since she'd fled Charleston had been filled with constant fear and looking over her shoulder, but the actual travel had been peaceful once she'd left the train in Tucson and caught the stage north to Pinyon. "Your trunk." Xavier glanced at the stage driver, who was already hauling down a worn leather trunk that contained everything Helena had managed to pack in her frantic flight. "That's all I have," she admitted, watching his reaction carefully. A man might wonder at a supposed widow who traveled so light, but Xavier simply nodded and hefted the trunk as though it weighed nothing. "I've got the wagon just there." He indicated a sturdy buckboard with a team of 2 horses waiting in the shade nearby. "Ranch is about an hour's ride. We'll be there before full dark." Helena followed him to the wagon, acutely aware of curious eyes watching from windows and doorways. A mail-order bride was probably noteworthy news in a town this size. Xavier secured her trunk in the back and then turned to help her up to the seat, his hands firm on her waist as he lifted her effortlessly. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach, and she quickly settled her skirts and clasped her hands in her lap. Xavier climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. They rolled out of town heading northeast, and Helena watched the buildings fall away behind them with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She was committed now, for better or worse. "I should tell you about the setup," Xavier said after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "Ranch house is decent-sized, 4 rooms and a loft. Been working the land for 6 years now, building up the herd. Got about 500 head of cattle and 20 horses. I've got 2 men who work for me full-time, Rafe and Thomas. They bunk in the smaller cabin about 100 yards from the main house. Rafe's wife Mary comes by twice a week to help with laundry and heavy cleaning, but the daily cooking and household managing, that's been falling to me, and I'm not much good at it." Helena nodded, watching the landscape change as they climbed gradually into rougher terrain. Pinyon pines appeared among the scrub, and the air grew slightly cooler. "How long have you been on your own?" "My mother passed 3 years ago. She'd come out to live with me after my father died back in Texas." Xavier's voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the thread of old grief beneath it. "Place is too much for one person to manage properly. I need someone who can handle the house side of things while I handle the ranch." It was honest and practical, which Helena appreciated. Many men might have dressed it up with pretty words about companionship or affection, but Xavier Turner struck her as someone who dealt in straight truths. That both reassured and worried her, since her entire presence here was built on deception. "I'm a good cook," she offered. "My grandmother taught me, and I can sew, manage accounts, preserve food. I grew up helping run a household." All true, though that household had included servants and a standard of living far beyond what she'd find on an Arizona cattle ranch. But the skills translated, and she'd been taught that a lady should know how to do everything she might ask her servants to do. "That's more than I hoped for," Xavier said, and she caught what might have been approval in his voice. "I'll be straight with you, Miss Lawson. I'm looking for a partnership more than a romance. I need a wife to help build this ranch into something lasting, someone steady and reliable who won't get spooked by hard work or the isolation. In return, I can promise you security, a home of your own, and respectful treatment. I don't drink heavy, don't gamble, and don't raise my hand to women or animals." The last phrase made Helena's heart clench, thinking of Vernon Blackthorne's casual violence and the cold promise in his eyes when she'd refused his suit. "That sounds more than fair, Mr. Turner." "Xavier," he said. "If we're going to be married, might as well use first names." "Helena, then." She glanced at his profile, noting the firm set of his jaw and the way he handled the reins with easy competence. "When were you thinking the wedding might take place?" "Father Miguel comes through once a month from the mission. He'll be here in 2 weeks. Figured that would give you time to settle in and make sure this is really what you want." Xavier glanced at her then, his blue-gray eyes serious. "I know it's a big step, coming all this way on faith. If you decide it's not right, I'll pay your fare back to wherever you want to go, no questions asked and no hard feelings." The unexpected kindness in the offer made Helena's throat tight. "That's generous. Just honest. No point in either of us being miserable." Xavier returned his attention to the road, which had narrowed to little more than a track through increasingly rough country. "But I'm hoping it'll work out. Your letters suggested someone sensible and level-headed, which is what I need." Guilt twisted in Helena's stomach. Her letters had been carefully crafted to present exactly the image she thought a rancher might want, while revealing as little actual detail as possible about her background. She'd never outright lied except about being a widow, but she'd certainly shaped the truth to her advantage. What would Xavier say if he knew she was running from a man who'd threatened to drag her to the altar by force if necessary? That her father had drunk and gambled away their family's fortune before dying of a heart ailment, leaving her mother and her with nothing but debts and vultures like Vernon Blackthorn circling. "I hope I can live up to your expectations," she said quietly. They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Helena found herself relaxing slightly despite her worries. There was something peaceful about the vast, empty spaces, so different from the crowded streets of Charleston. Here, the only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the occasional call of a bird. The air smelled of dust and pine, and something wild she couldn't name. "There," Xavier said eventually, pointing ahead to where a cluster of buildings sat in a valley between rolling hills. "That's home." The ranch house was larger than Helena had expected, built of adobe and wood with a wide porch running across the front. A windmill turned lazily near a stone well, and she could see corrals with horses, a barn, and the smaller cabin Xavier had mentioned. Smoke rose from the chimney of the cabin, suggesting his ranch hands were preparing their evening meal. Everything looked weathered but well-maintained, suggesting an owner who took pride in his property. Xavier pulled the wagon up in front of the main house and set the brake before jumping down. He came around to help Helena dismount, his hands once again sure and careful on her waist. She found herself noticing details about him now that they were closer. The tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly over his collar, the clean masculine scent of him mixed with leather and sage. "I'll show you around inside," he said, releasing her and reaching for her trunk. "You'll have the bedroom. I've been sleeping in the loft since Ma passed, so there's no need to feel uncomfortable about the arrangement." Helena followed him into the house, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table with 6 chairs, and a sitting area with a worn but comfortable-looking sofa and 2 chairs. Everything was clean but had the slightly dusty, neglected air of a space managed by someone whose priorities lay elsewhere. A kitchen area took up one corner, with a good iron stove and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Xavier set her trunk down and gestured to a door on the left. "Bedroom's through there. Has a decent bed and a wardrobe, and there's a washstand. Privy's out back, but I'm planning to add a bathing room onto the house next year if things go well with the herd." Helena opened the door to find a simple but pleasant room with whitewashed walls, a large bed covered with a faded quilt, and a window overlooking the eastern hills. It was sparse but clean, and after 3 weeks of sleeping in trains and way stations, it looked like paradise. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Thank you. You must be hungry. I've got some stew left from yesterday. It's nothing fancy, but it's filling." Xavier moved to the kitchen area, stirring up the coals in the stove and setting a pot to heat. "Tomorrow you can start fresh with whatever you want to make. Pantry's stocked, and there's a root cellar out back with potatoes, onions, carrots, and such. We butchered a steer 2 weeks back, so there's plenty of beef in the cold storage." Helena removed her traveling jacket and bonnet, then rolled up her sleeves. "Let me help." They worked together in companionable silence, Xavier slicing bread while Helena found bowls and checked the stew, adding a bit of water and some dried herbs she discovered in a tin. It was strange and intimate, this simple domestic task with a man who was essentially a stranger. Yet there was something comfortable about it too. Xavier moved efficiently despite his claim of being no good at household tasks, and she suspected he'd been managing better than he'd let on. They ate at the table as twilight deepened outside, and Helena found herself stealing glances at Xavier in the lamplight. His hands were scarred and weathered from hard work, but he held his spoon with surprising delicacy. He ate with the focused attention of a man who'd burned a lot of energy during the day, but he wasn't crude or hurried about it. "Tell me about the town," she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. "Is it just what I saw on the main street? Mostly." "We've got the general store, post office, a saloon, the blacksmith, and a boarding house that serves meals. There's a schoolhouse, though there's only about 8 children of school age in the area right now. Father Miguel holds Mass once a month in the schoolhouse when he comes through. Nearest doctor is in Prescott, about 2 days' ride, but there's a Yavapai woman named Gray Dove who knows healing herbs and helps with birthing babies. Most folks around here are ranchers or miners. Silver strikes in the hills brought some people in, though nothing major." "And your neighbors?" Helena asked, realizing that she'd be largely isolated here with occasional trips to town. "The Hendersons have the spread to the south, about 5 miles off. Good people. Ben Henderson and his wife Clara have 3 daughters. To the north is the Garrison Ranch, bigger operation than mine. Frank Garrison's a tough old bastard, pardon the language, but fair enough. He's got a son, Matthew, who helps run things." Xavier finished his stew and sat back. "We help each other out during roundup and when there's trouble, but mostly folks keep to themselves out here." "What kind of trouble?" Helena's chest tightened at the thought. "Weather mostly. Drought or flash floods. Sometimes cattle raiders, though we've been lucky the past couple years. There's been some tension with settlers pushing into Yavapai territory up north, but we're far enough south that it hasn't affected us much." Xavier's expression was serious. "I won't lie and say it's easy or always safe out here, Helena, but I'll do everything I can to protect you and this place." There was a quiet intensity in his words that made Helena believe him. This was a man who meant what he said and followed through. It was so different from the empty promises and casual cruelties she'd experienced in Charleston that she felt something inside her begin to unclench, just slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she said, "and I'm not fragile despite appearances." Xavier studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that those blue-gray eyes saw more than she wanted them to. "You've got shadows in your eyes that suggest you've seen some trouble of your own. I won't pry into what brought you out here beyond what you've told me, but if there's something I should know about, something that might follow you, I'd appreciate the honesty." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her chance to tell him the truth, to lay out the whole sordid story and let him decide if he still wanted a runaway for a bride. But fear closed her throat. What if he sent her away? What if he felt deceived and refused to help her? She had barely enough money left for a week's lodging, let alone a train ticket to somewhere else. And where would she go? I came west for a fresh start, she said carefully, which was true as far as it went. My father passed away and left my mother and me in difficult circumstances. The man who offered marriage in Charleston was not someone I could respect or trust, so when I saw your advertisement, it seemed like providence. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either, and she saw Xavier's eyes narrow slightly. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. We've all got our reasons for ending up where we do. Long as you're not married to someone else or running from the law, I figure the past can stay in the past. Relief flooded through her. I'm not married and I haven't broken any laws. Then we'll start fresh from here. Xavier stood and collected their bowls. You must be exhausted. Why don't you turn in? I'll clean up and tend to the horses. Helena wanted to protest, to prove her worth by taking over the washing up, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The past 3 weeks of constant tension and travel had drained her more than she'd realized. Thank you. What time should I rise in the morning? I'm usually up before dawn, but you take whatever time you need to settle in. Tomorrow's soon enough to fall into a routine. Xavier was already pumping water into a basin, his back to her, giving her privacy to retreat to the bedroom. Helena gathered her courage and crossed the room, pausing in the doorway. Xavier, thank you for your kindness. I'll try to be the partner you need. He glanced over his shoulder and something in his expression softened. I think you'll do just fine, Helena. Sleep well. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. The room was dark except for moonlight streaming through the window, and she fumbled to light the oil lamp on the washstand. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and she opened it with shaking hands, pulling out her nightgown and the few precious items she'd brought from home. Her grandmother's silver locket, her mother's last letter pressed between the pages of a book of poetry, and buried at the bottom, a small pistol that her mother had pressed into her hands the night she'd fled. Helena held the pistol, cold and heavy in her palm, and wondered if Vernon Blackthorne was searching for her even now. Would he give up eventually and find another victim, or would his pride demand that he hunt her down? She tried so hard to cover her tracks, but men like Vernon had resources and connections. She tucked the pistol under her pillow, knowing it was probably foolish but needing the security of it nearby. Then she changed into her nightgown and washed her face in the cool water from the pitcher, scrubbing away 3 weeks of dust and fear. When she finally crawled between the sheets, the bed was softer than she'd expected, and the room smelled faintly of lavender, as though someone had once kept sachets in the wardrobe. Xavier's mother, she thought. A woman who'd come west with her son and made a home in this harsh, beautiful country. Had she been happy here? Had she felt safe? Helena closed her eyes and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the creak of wood settling, the distant call of a coyote, the low murmur of Xavier's voice as he spoke to the horses in the barn. Despite everything, she felt the first stirrings of something that might eventually become peace. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the main room. Pale dawn light filtered through the window, and for a moment, Helena was disoriented, expecting to see her familiar bedroom in Charleston. Then memory returned, and she sat up quickly, realizing she'd slept far later than intended. Helena dressed hurriedly in one of her simpler day dresses, a dark blue cotton that was practical for work, and quickly braided her long brown hair. She splashed water on her face and emerged from the bedroom to find Xavier at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet with the focused concentration of someone attempting a challenging task. "Good morning," she said, and he turned with a slight smile. "Morning. Hope I didn't wake you with all my clattering around." He gestured to the table where he'd already set out plates and cups. "Coffee's ready and these eggs are almost done. They might not be pretty, but they are edible. You should have woken me. I'm supposed to be the one cooking." Helena poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, grateful for the strong brew. "Figured you needed the rest more than I needed pretty eggs." Xavier slid the eggs onto plates along with thick slices of fried bread. "Besides, you'll have plenty of opportunities to show off your skills. This is your first full day here. Ease into it." They ate together as morning light strengthened through the windows, and Helena found herself studying the house with a more practical eye. The floors needed sweeping, the windows could use cleaning, and she'd noticed dust on most of the surfaces. But it was fundamentally sound and well built, with good bones. She could make this place into a real home given time and effort. "What are your plans for the day?" she asked. "Need to ride out and check the north pasture, make sure the fence line is holding. Rafe and Thomas will be working on breaking one of the new horses. I should be back by mid-afternoon." Xavier finished his eggs and drained his coffee. "You'll be all right here on your own, of course. I'll start getting familiar with everything and begin putting the house in order." Helena felt a flutter of nervousness at being left alone in this unfamiliar place, but she pushed it down. She'd survived 3 weeks of traveling alone across the country. She could certainly manage a day in a ranch house. Xavier stood and collected his hat from a peg by the door, then hesitated. "If you need anything, the bunkhouse is just across the way. Mary Henderson is coming by mid-morning to bring some eggs and check on you. I asked her to stop in since it's your first day." The thoughtfulness of it surprised Helena. "Thank you, that was kind. Just practical. She'll be able to show you where things are better than I could explain them." Xavier settled his hat on his head and moved toward the door, then paused again. "Helena, I'm glad you're here. I know this is all strange and new, but I think it's going to work out fine." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her standing in the middle of the main room with her coffee cup warming her hands and an unexpected lump in her throat. Xavier Turner was nothing like what she'd expected. She'd anticipated someone rougher, perhaps crude or demanding, a man who wanted a wife only for the work she could do and the children she could bear. Instead, she'd found someone careful and considerate, someone who seemed genuinely interested in partnership rather than ownership. It made her deception feel worse, not better. Helena pushed the guilt aside and threw herself into work. She started by sweeping the entire house, then wiping down every surface with a damp cloth. She washed the breakfast dishes and explored the pantry, taking mental inventory of what was available and what they might need. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with basics: flour and cornmeal, beans and rice, canned tomatoes and peaches, dried herbs and spices. She found sourdough starter in a crock and coffee beans in an airtight tin. There was even a small collection of recipes written in a careful feminine hand, notes in the margins suggesting Xavier's mother's touch. She was elbow-deep in scrubbing the kitchen shelves when she heard a knock at the door. Helena wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a woman in her 30s with kind brown eyes and a warm smile, a basket over her arm. "You must be Helena. I'm Mary Henderson. Xavier asked me to stop by and make sure you're settling in all right." Mary held out the basket. "I brought fresh eggs and some butter, and there's a loaf of bread I baked yesterday. Please come in. Thank you so much." Helena took the basket gratefully and gestured to the table. "Would you like some coffee? I just put on a fresh pot." "That would be lovely." Mary followed her inside, looking around with approval. "I can see you've already been hard at work. Place is looking brighter already." They sat together over coffee, and Helena found herself relaxing in Mary's easy presence. Mary had lived in the territory for 8 years, having come out with her husband when they were newlyweds. She had a wealth of practical information about managing a household in Arizona, from dealing with scorpions and rattlesnakes to preserving food in the heat and finding wild herbs for cooking and medicine. "Xavier's a good man," Mary said after they'd been talking for a while. "One of the best out here. He helped my Ben when we had trouble with raiders 3 years back, rode over in the middle of the night when we sent word. Didn't hesitate. And when I lost the baby I was carrying 2 winters ago, he brought fresh meat every week for a month and never made me feel like it was charity." Helena felt her chest tighten. "That must have been terribly hard. I'm so sorry." "It was, but that's life out here. You learn to be grateful for the good days and survive the hard ones." Mary's eyes were sympathetic. "I know this must all seem overwhelming. Coming to a strange place to marry a man you don't know, that takes courage." "Or desperation," Helena said before she could stop herself. Mary didn't seem surprised. "Most of us out here are running from something or towards something, sometimes both. The important thing is what you do once you arrive. You seem like someone with sense and grit, and that's what matters in this country." They spent another hour together, with Mary showing Helena the root cellar, the cold storage where fresh meat was kept surrounded by ice from the winter stores, and the various outbuildings. She pointed out which plants in the small herb garden near the back door were culinary and which were medicinal, and she explained the system Xavier had for managing laundry, water, and irrigation for the garden. "You're welcome to visit any time," Mary said as she prepared to leave. "It's only 5 miles and the company would be welcome. Gets lonely out here sometimes, just talking to my husband and daughters. Nice to have another woman nearby." After Mary left, Helena felt more settled. She had an ally, someone who could help her navigate this new life. She spent the afternoon planning meals and cleaning the bedroom more thoroughly, beating the dust from the mattress and airing out the quilts. She found linens in a chest that smelled of cedar and lavender, and she made up the bed with fresh sheets, wondering if Xavier would notice or care about such small domestic touches. When Xavier returned in the late afternoon, dusty and tired, she had supper ready: fried chicken, biscuits, green beans cooked with bacon, and dried apple pie made from fruit she'd found in the pantry. He stopped in the doorway, blinking at the transformation. The house gleamed, delicious smells filled the air, and the table was set with care. "Good Lord," he said quietly, "I'd forgotten what a real home felt like." Helena felt herself flush with pleasure at the praise. "Mary came by and helped me get oriented. She's wonderful." "She is that. Ben Henderson's a lucky man." Xavier washed up at the basin by the door, scrubbing the dust from his face and arms, then joined her at the table. When he took his first bite of chicken, his eyes closed briefly in appreciation. "Helena, this is the best meal I've had in 3 years. You weren't exaggerating about your cooking skills." "My grandmother believed that good food was an expression of care for the people you fed," Helena said, remembering the old woman's patient instruction in their Charleston kitchen. It felt safe to share this much, these small true pieces of her past that had nothing to do with Vernon Blackthorne or debts or violence. They ate together, conversation flowing more easily than it had the night before. Xavier told her about the ranch, his plans to expand the herd and eventually buy the adjoining acreage if it came available. He spoke with passion about the land and the work, and Helena found herself drawn into his vision, seeing it through his eyes. This wasn't just a business to him, it was a dream he was building one day at a time. "What about you?" Xavier asked as they finished the pie. "What do you dream about, Helena?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Her father had dreamed about the next card game, her mother about maintaining their social position, Vernon Blackthorne about owning her. But what did she dream about? "Safety," she said honestly. A place where I can breathe without fear. And maybe someday, a family. People to care for and who care for me in return. Xavier's blue-gray eyes were steady on hers. That seems like a reasonable dream, one we might be able to build together if things work out. Yes, Helena whispered. I'd like that. The next 2 weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Helena rose before dawn to cook breakfast, and she and Xavier shared the morning meal before he headed out to work. She spent her days transforming the house into a true home, sewing new curtains from fabric she found in a trunk, tending the small garden, preserving vegetables and fruits that neighbors brought by. Word spread quickly about Xavier's new bride-to-be, and several ranch wives stopped in to introduce themselves and size her up. Helena met each with as much honesty as she dared, carefully deflecting questions about her past while being warm and open about her present circumstances. In the evenings, she and Xavier would eat dinner together and then often sit on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier was surprisingly well-read for a rancher, and they discovered a shared love of poetry and history. He told her about growing up in Texas, learning the cattle business from his father, and the decision to strike out for Arizona territory after his father's death. She told him carefully edited stories about Charleston, about her grandmother's garden and her mother's charity work, painting a picture of a genteel life that had ended with her father's death and her decision to start fresh. It wasn't all lies. These were pieces of her truth, just not the whole truth. She found herself watching for Xavier's return each day with increasing anticipation. He had a quiet strength that drew her, and she noticed small kindnesses in his behavior. The way he always thanked her for meals, how he'd fixed the stuck window in her bedroom without being asked, the time he'd brought back wildflowers from the range and left them on the table without comment. She was beginning to care for him, and that terrified her, because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. She'd learned that lesson too well in Charleston. The night before Father Miguel was due to arrive for the wedding, Xavier asked her to walk with him after supper. They strolled toward the corral where the horses dozed in the twilight, and Helena's heart hammered nervously. Was he going to call off the wedding? Had he sensed her deception? Helena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Xavier leaned against the corral fence, his expression serious in the fading light. Are you sure you want to go through with this tomorrow? Because once we're married, I take that seriously. I don't believe in walking away when things get hard. If you have any doubts, now's the time to speak up. Relief made her almost dizzy. I want to marry you, Xavier. These past 2 weeks, I've been happier than I've been in a very long time. You're a good man, and I think we can build something real together. I think so too. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. I want you to know that I'll take care of you, Helena. Whatever troubles you've left behind, whatever brought you here, you're safe now. This is your home, and I'll protect it and you with everything I have. The sincerity in his voice made Helena's eyes sting with tears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she really was safe here in this remote corner of Arizona territory. But part of her still waited for the other shoe to drop, for Vernon Blackthorne to appear like a nightmare made flesh and destroy this fragile new beginning. Thank you, she managed. That means more to me than you know. Xavier lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and sweet. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. Helena barely slept that night, tossing and turning between excitement and fear. When dawn came, she rose and dressed in her best gown, a dove-gray silk that she'd managed to pack despite her hurried flight. It wasn't the elaborate wedding dress she'd once imagined wearing, but it was pretty and well made, and it would have to do. She pinned her hair up carefully and fastened her grandmother's locket around her neck for courage. Father Miguel arrived mid-morning, a weathered priest in his 50s who'd been riding a circuit through the territory for 20 years. He greeted Helena warmly and spoke with Xavier privately for several minutes before declaring himself satisfied to perform the ceremony. By noon, a small crowd had gathered at the ranch. Mary and Ben Henderson with their 3 daughters, Rafe and Thomas from the bunkhouse, Frank Garrison and his son Matthew, and several other neighbors who'd ridden in to witness the wedding and celebrate. They held the ceremony in front of the ranch house with the mountains as a backdrop. Helena's hands trembled as she placed them in Xavier's larger ones, but his steady grip anchored her. Father Miguel spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the challenges of building a life together in a harsh land, about faith and commitment, and the grace needed to sustain a partnership through good times and bad. Do you, Xavier Turner, take Helena Lawson to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Xavier's voice was firm and sure, his blue-gray eyes locked on Helena's face. And do you, Helena Lawson, take Xavier Turner to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Helena thought of Vernon Blackthorne and her desperate flight, of all the lies and half-truths she'd told to reach this moment. She thought of Xavier's kindness and strength, of the home they could build together. She thought of the choice before her: admit the truth and risk everything, or commit fully to this new life and hope the past stayed buried. I do, she said, and meant it. Father Miguel smiled and blessed their union. Then, by the power vested in me by the Catholic Church and the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Xavier, you may kiss your bride. Xavier leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Helena didn't want to. She tilted her face up and felt the soft press of his lips against hers, brief and chaste but full of promise. When they pulled apart, his eyes held warmth and something that might have been the beginning of affection. The crowd cheered and surged forward with congratulations. Mary hugged Helena tightly. Welcome to the family, dear. We're so happy for you both. The celebration continued through the afternoon with food and music and dancing. Someone had brought a fiddle, and the rough yard in front of the ranch house became a dance floor. Xavier claimed the first dance with his new wife, and Helena found herself swept into his arms, following his lead as they moved to a lively reel. He was surprisingly graceful for such a large man, and she felt herself relaxing into the joy of the moment. As the sun began to set, the guests gradually departed, offering final well wishes and congratulations. Xavier waved off the last of them and turned to Helena, who stood on the porch watching the dust settle on the road. Well, Mrs. Turner, what do you think? His use of her new name sent a shiver through her. I think it was perfect, she said honestly. Thank you for making it special. They cleaned up together, working in comfortable silence to clear away the detritus of the party. When everything was put away, an awkward tension settled between them. They were married now, which meant expectations and intimacies that hadn't existed before. Helena, Xavier said carefully, I want you to know that I don't expect anything tonight or any night until you're ready. I meant what I said about partnership. I'm not going to demand anything you're not willing to give. The relief that flooded through her was followed immediately by a confusing stab of disappointment. She'd been bracing herself for demands, for the kind of proprietary assumption of rights that Vernon Blackthorne had made clear he'd claim. But Xavier was offering her choice and control, and she didn't quite know how to handle such unexpected respect. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's very kind. But Xavier, we are married now. I don't want you sleeping in the loft forever. This is your home, your room. I'm the one who came into it." Xavier studied her face, searching for something. "Are you sure?" Helena thought about it, really thought about it. She was attracted to Xavier, drawn to his quiet strength and fundamental decency. The past 2 weeks had shown her a man she could trust, or at least wanted desperately to trust. And they were married now, bound together before God and witnesses. Running from intimacy would only delay the inevitable and keep them both trapped in uncertainty. "I'm sure," she said. "We're husband and wife. Let's start as we mean to go on." That night, Xavier came to her with gentleness and patience, taking his time to ease her nervousness. He treated her like something precious rather than something owned, and Helena found herself responding to his careful attention in ways that surprised her. There was tenderness in his touch and a hesitant wonder in his eyes, as though he too found this intimacy unexpected and meaningful. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Xavier's arm around her waist and his steady breathing warm against her neck, Helena felt the last of her resistance crumble. She was in love with her husband. Somewhere between the first meeting in Pinyon and this moment, she'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Xavier Turner, and that made the lie between them more dangerous than ever. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Helena's life. She and Xavier settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by genuine affection and a deepening bond. Xavier taught her to ride well enough to occasionally accompany him on short trips around the ranch, and she thrilled at the freedom of galloping across the open range with the wind in her hair. She taught him to appreciate subtleties in cooking beyond mere sustenance, and took quiet pride in the way he savored her meals. They worked side by side, expanding the garden, planning improvements to the ranch, talking late into the night about their dreams for the future. Xavier began speaking casually about children, about adding rooms to the house for the family they'd have someday, and Helena found herself wanting that future with a fierce intensity that sometimes frightened her. But underneath, the joy ran a constant current of fear. She jumped at unexpected sounds, found herself scanning the horizon whenever she was outside, and had nightmares about Vernon Blackthorne that left her gasping awake in the darkness. Xavier noticed, though he didn't push. He'd simply hold her until the shaking stopped, murmuring reassurances and asking no questions. 3 months into their marriage, Helena's worst fears materialized. She was in town with Mary Henderson, buying supplies and chatting with the clerk at the general store, when a stranger walked in. He was a hard-faced man in his 40s with cold eyes and a gun worn low on his hip, dressed too well for a common drifter. Helena felt her blood turn to ice when those eyes swept the store and landed on her. "Excuse me, madam," he said, approaching with predatory smoothness. "I'm looking for someone and you might be able to help. I'm searching for a young lady from Charleston, South Carolina. Dark hair, brown eyes, about your height and build. Goes by the name Helena Lawson. Her family's worried sick about her." Helena's vision narrowed to a tunnel. She gripped the counter to keep herself upright, her mind racing. This man worked for Vernon. He had to. No one else would be searching for her out here. "Can't say I've heard of anyone by that name," the clerk said slowly, "but folks come and go through here regular enough." "What's your interest in the lady? Her fiancé sent me to find her." The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She took off before the wedding, and he's concerned for her safety. He just wants to make sure she's all right, bring her home where she belongs." Mary Henderson stepped forward, her expression puzzled but protective. "We're a small community here, mister. If someone matching that description came through, we'd know about it. Sorry, we can't help you." The stranger's eyes lingered on Helena, who kept her face carefully neutral despite the terror clawing at her throat. She wore a simple ranch wife's dress, and her hair was pinned up under a bonnet, sun-darkened skin and calloused hands marking her as someone who'd been in the territory for months. She looked nothing like the pale, pampered Charleston lady she'd once been. "I appreciate your time, ladies." The stranger tipped his hat but didn't move toward the door. "I'll be staying at the boarding house for a few days, asking around. If you hear anything, I'd be much obliged if you'd let me know. Name's Jack Hawkins." He finally left, and Helena sagged against the counter, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Mary's hand gripped her arm, steadying her. "Helena, are you all right? You've gone white as a sheet." "I need to get home," Helena whispered. "Please, Mary, I need to get back to the ranch." Mary asked no questions, just helped Helena to the wagon and drove her home at a faster pace than was strictly safe on the rough road. When they pulled up in front of the ranch house, Xavier was working nearby and looked up in alarm at their arrival. He took one look at Helena's face and strode over, helping her down from the wagon. "What happened?" "There's a man in town," Mary said quietly, "asking about a woman from Charleston." "Helena, I don't know what's going on, but if you need help, you have friends here." Helena couldn't speak past the fear choking her. Xavier's arm tightened around her waist and he nodded to Mary. "Thank you for bringing her home. I'll take care of this." After Mary left, Xavier guided Helena inside and sat her down at the table. He poured her a glass of water and waited patiently until she could breathe normally again. Then he pulled a chair close and took her hands in his. "Tell me," he said simply. "All of it." So Helena did. She told him everything she'd held back, the whole ugly story spilling out in a rush of words. Her father's gambling debts, Vernon Blackthorne's purchase of those debts, and his assumption of ownership over her future, the threats when she'd refused his suit. The night he'd cornered her in their Charleston home and told her that she'd marry him or he'd see her mother ruined and homeless, his hand tight around her throat hard enough to leave bruises. Her desperate flight with her mother's help, using every bit of cunning she possessed to cover her tracks. "I'm so sorry," she finished, tears streaming down her face. "I should have told you from the beginning. I wanted to, but I was so scared you'd send me away. And then I fell in love with you, and it got harder and harder to find the right moment. I never meant to deceive you, Xavier. I just wanted to be safe." Xavier listened to all of it without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his thumb rubbing absently across her knuckles. Helena held her breath, waiting for anger or disappointment or rejection. "This Vernon Blackthorne," Xavier finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "Did he hurt you?" He grabbed me, threatened me. "He would have done worse if I'd stayed." Helena's voice shook. "He's a dangerous man, Xavier, powerful and connected. He sent someone all the way to Arizona to track me down. He won't give up. Neither will I." Xavier's eyes met hers, and the fierce protectiveness she saw there made her breath catch. "You're my wife, Helena. I don't care what some bastard in Charleston thinks he's owed. You belong here now with me, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take you away. But he'll come. That man in town, he works for Vernon, I know it. When I don't turn up, Vernon will come himself. He'll make trouble, maybe try to claim I'm still obligated to marry him because of the debts. Let him try." Xavier stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through the problem. "We're legally married. You're Helena Turner now, not Helena Lawson. This is Arizona territory, not South Carolina. Their debts and contracts don't mean a damn thing out here. And if he tries to take you by force, he'll find that the people in this territory protect their own." Helena wanted desperately to believe him, but fear had its claws too deep in her. "You don't know Vernon. He's ruthless. He might hurt you to get to me." Xavier stopped pacing and crouched in front of her chair, taking her face gently in his hands. "Helena, look at me. I meant every word of those marriage vows. You're mine to protect now, and I take that responsibility seriously. This Blackthorn can send all the hired guns he wants. They'll find that Western men don't take kindly to Eastern bullies thinking they can ride in and claim what's not theirs." "I'm so sorry," Helena whispered again. "I've brought trouble to your door." "You've brought joy to my home and purpose to my life," Xavier corrected firmly. "Everything else we'll handle together. That's what marriage means, Helena. We face the troubles together, no matter where they come from." He pulled her into his arms, and Helena clung to him, letting herself draw strength from his solid presence. She'd been alone with her fear for so long that having someone to share the burden felt almost miraculous. Xavier stroked her hair and murmured reassurances until her tears stopped. "Here's what we're going to do," Xavier said, pulling back enough to look at her. "First, I'm going to ride into town and have a conversation with this Jack Hawkins. Make sure he understands that you're not the woman he's looking for. Second, I'll talk to Ben Henderson and Frank Garrison, let them know there might be trouble coming. If Blackthorn shows up, he'll find the whole community united against him. Third, we're going to get our marriage properly registered in Prescott, make sure there's no question about its legality." "What if none of that's enough?" Helena asked. "What if he tries to take me anyway?" Xavier's expression hardened. "Then he'll discover what happens to men who threaten my wife. I'm not a violent man, Helena, but I will protect what's mine. You need to trust me on this." Helena searched his face and found only determination and care. "I do trust you. More than I've ever trusted anyone." "Good. Then stop apologizing and let me handle this." Xavier kissed her forehead gently. "I'm going to town now. I want you to stay inside, keep the rifle nearby. Rafe and Thomas are working close to the house today. If you need anything, fire a shot and they'll come running." After Xavier left, Helena tried to keep herself busy with routine tasks, but her hands shook too badly to sew and she couldn't focus enough to read. She kept looking out the window, half expecting to see Vernon Blackthorn riding up the road with an army behind him. The afternoon dragged on endlessly until she finally heard hoofbeats and Xavier returned, his expression grim but satisfied. "It's handled for now," he said, dismounting and coming to her on the porch. "I found Hawkins at the saloon and made it clear that I know every woman in this territory, and none of them match the description of his missing Charleston lady. Suggested he might have better luck looking in California, since that's where a lot of women end up when they're running from trouble back east. He didn't believe me entirely, but he doesn't have proof you're here either." "Will he leave?" Helena asked hopefully. "Probably not immediately. He'll nose around for a few days, but without evidence, there's not much he can do. And I made sure he understood that the people here don't appreciate strangers stirring up trouble." Xavier's smile was grim. "Frank Garrison made the same point even more forcefully when he happened to run into us. Seems word's already spread that someone's asking uncomfortable questions, and the community's closed ranks." Helena felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it made her dizzy. These people barely knew her, yet they were standing with her against a threat from her past. Why would they do that? "They don't owe me anything. Because you're one of us now, and because most folks out here came west to leave something behind, we understand about fresh starts." Xavier guided her back inside and pulled her into his arms. "I talked to Father Miguel too. He's willing to testify if needed that he performed a legal marriage ceremony 3 months ago. Your new name is on the church records. There's no legal claim Blackthorn can make that will hold up." "Legal claims aren't what I'm afraid of," Helena admitted. Vernon doesn't care about the law if it doesn't suit him. He'll try to take me by force if he has to. Then he'll fail because I won't let it happen." Xavier's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Helena, I need you to believe that you're safe here. I know you've been scared and running for so long that it's hard to trust, but you have to try. Can you do that?" Helena looked up into her husband's face, seeing the determination and love there, and made a choice. She could keep living in fear, or she could choose to believe in the protection Xavier and this community were offering. She could keep running, or she could stand and fight for the life she'd begun to build. "Yes," she said, "I can try." Over the next several days, the tension gradually eased. Jack Hawkins was seen around Pinyon less and less, and eventually word came that he'd left town heading west. Helena began to breathe easier, though she remained watchful. Xavier never mentioned her deception again, or made her feel guilty for the lies she'd told. Instead, he simply incorporated this new knowledge into their life together, understanding now why she sometimes woke from nightmares or startled at unexpected sounds. A month passed, then two. The seasons began to change, the intense summer heat giving way to the more moderate temperatures of autumn. Helena threw herself into preparing for winter, preserving the harvest from their garden and the bounty that neighbors shared. She found peace in the routine work and in the gradual certainty that she really might be safe here. She was hanging laundry one October morning when she saw dust rising on the road from town. A single rider approached at a steady pace, and as he drew closer, Helena felt her blood turn cold. She knew that figure, those movements. She'd spent months in Charleston trying to avoid him at social gatherings and dreading his visits to her home. Vernon Blackthorne had found her. Helena dropped the laundry basket and ran for the house, grabbing the rifle from its place above the door. Her hands shook as she loaded it, but she managed, and then she positioned herself where she could see out the window while remaining mostly hidden. Xavier was somewhere on the North Range with Rafe and Thomas, too far away to get back quickly. She was on her own. Vernon dismounted in front of the house with practiced ease, adjusting his expensive jacket and removing his hat to reveal the handsome face that hid such cruelty. He was tall and well-built, with dark hair silvered at the temples and cold green eyes that had always reminded Helena of a snake. He moved with the arrogant confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. "Helena," he called out, "I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk reasonably about this situation. There's no need for unpleasantness." Helena said nothing, keeping the rifle trained on him through the window. "Your mother sends her regards," Vernon continued, his voice carrying easily in the clear air. "She's worried about you, naturally, quite distressed that you ran off without a word. I've assured her that I harbor no ill will about your momentary panic. Wedding nerves are understandable in a young woman. I'm prepared to forgive everything and take you home where you belong." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Helena called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm married now." "Legally married, you have no claim on me." Vernon's expression darkened. "That frontier farce. Helena, don't be absurd. You were promised to me. Your father's debts transferred that obligation. This so-called marriage is meaningless. I have lawyers who will sort it out." "Not in Arizona territory, you don't." Helena kept the rifle aimed at his chest. "I'm Helena Turner now. This is my home, and my husband will be back shortly with several armed men. I suggest you leave before they arrive." "Is that a threat?" Vernon's voice took on the silky tone she remembered too well, the one that preceded violence. "Helena, I've ridden a very long way to fetch you home. I'm not leaving without what belongs to me. Now stop this foolishness and come out before I lose my patience." "She told you no, Blackthorne." "I suggest you listen." Vernon spun around to find Xavier sitting on his horse about 20 yards away, a rifle resting casually across his saddle. He must have seen the dust and ridden back at speed, approaching quietly from a different direction. Helena's heart leaped with relief and terror combined. "You must be the rancher," Vernon said, his tone dismissive. "This doesn't concern you. The woman in that house is my fiancée. She ran away from a lawful betrothal and I'm here to retrieve her. The woman in that house is my wife." Xavier's voice was flat and cold. "And you're trespassing on my land. You've got 10 seconds to mount up and ride out before I start shooting." Vernon laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You think you can threaten me? I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, connections, hired guns. I can destroy you and everyone in this pathetic little territory." "Maybe." Xavier didn't move, but something in his stillness suggested a coiled spring ready to release. "But you'll be dead, so you won't get to enjoy it. Helena is legally my wife. We were married by a Catholic priest with witnesses. The marriage is registered in Prescott. You have no legal standing here. And even if you did, no judge in Arizona is going to side with some eastern dandy trying to abduct a rancher's wife." "Abduct?" Vernon's voice rose. "She's mine. Her father promised her to me in exchange for his debts. Her father's dead, and his debts died with him." Xavier finally moved, swinging down from his horse with predatory grace. "You want to try taking her, then you'll have to go through me. And brother, I've fought Comanche raiders, survived droughts and floods, and built this ranch from nothing. You think I'm scared of some city man in fancy clothes?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vernon's face. He'd expected resistance, but not this kind of unified, confident pushback. He'd been counting on frontier justice being malleable, on being able to buy or intimidate his way to what he wanted. But he was starting to realize that neither would work here. "I can pay," Vernon said, switching tactics. "Whatever you want for her. Name your price. Surely a simple rancher could use capital to expand his operation." The insult hung in the air. Xavier's jaw tightened dangerously. "You think my wife is for sale?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which was somehow more menacing than shouting. "You think you can buy her like a head of cattle? Get back on your horse right now, or I swear to God I will put a bullet through you and sleep just fine tonight." More riders appeared on the road. Rafe and Thomas, Ben Henderson and his 2 oldest sons, Frank Garrison and Matthew. They formed a loose semicircle around Vernon, all armed, all watching with hard expressions. Vernon looked around and finally seemed to grasp the depth of his miscalculation. "This isn't over," he said, trying to maintain his dignity. "I'll go to the territorial governor, I'll bring federal marshals. You'll do none of that," Frank Garrison interrupted, his weathered face stern. "Because if you make trouble for the Turners, you make trouble for all of us. And we don't take kindly to troublemakers out here. You might have money and connections back east, but out here you're just another man. And men die in the desert all the time. Bodies get lost. Nobody asks too many questions." It was a blatant threat, and everyone knew it. Vernon's face flushed with rage, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He mounted his horse stiffly and glared at Xavier. "You'll regret this, both of you." "Already tired of your voice," Xavier said flatly. "Start riding." Vernon wheeled his horse and galloped back toward town, dust billowing in his wake. The assembled men watched until he was out of sight, then began to disperse with quiet words of support for Xavier. Ben Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. "You need anything, you let us know. We'll keep watch, make sure he actually leaves the territory." After everyone left, Xavier came into the house to find Helena still holding the rifle, tears streaming down her face. He gently took the weapon from her and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. He's gone and he won't be back. He knows he can't win here. He said it's not over. Helena's voice was muffled against his chest. He'll find another way. No, he won't. Because men like that are bullies, and bullies back down when someone stands up to them. He rode all this way thinking he could intimidate you or buy you back, and he discovered he can't do either. He'll go home and eventually find another victim, but he's done with you. Xavier pulled back enough to look at her face. Do you believe me? Helena searched his eyes and found only certainty. Slowly, she nodded. I want to believe you. Then do. Choose to believe that you're safe, that this is really your home, that I meant every word when I said I'd protect you. Xavier cupped her face in his hands. Helena, I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly, maybe that first day when you stepped down from the stage looking terrified but determined, or maybe later when I came home to the smell of your cooking and realized what I'd been missing. But I love you, and that means you're mine to protect, forever. I love you too, Helena whispered, the words coming easily despite her fear, so much that it scares me sometimes. Then be scared, but be scared here with me. Don't let him take this away from us. Xavier kissed her gently. We're going to have a good life, Helena. We're going to build this ranch together, raise children, grow old watching the sunset from that porch. Vernon Blackthorne is nothing but a bad memory now. Over the following weeks, Xavier made good on his promise to ensure their safety. He rode to Prescott and spoke with the territorial authorities, making sure their marriage was fully documented and that Vernon Blackthorne had no legal recourse. He paid for a lawyer to draft papers officially stating that any debts of Helena's father had died with him and created no obligation for his daughter. Word came through various channels that Vernon had indeed left Arizona territory, heading back east with his tail between his legs. Gradually, Helena allowed herself to believe it was truly over. The nightmares came less frequently. She stopped jumping at every unexpected sound. The constant knot of tension in her stomach began to unwind. She let herself sink fully into her life as Xavier's wife, no longer holding part of herself back in preparation for flight. That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. But Helena found unexpected joy in those weeks of enforced intimacy with Xavier. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking about their pasts with complete honesty now that there were no more secrets between them. Xavier taught her to play chess, and Helena taught him to knit, laughing at his clumsy attempts but moved by his willingness to try. When spring came, bringing warmth and renewal, Helena realized with joy and trepidation that she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Xavier, nervous about his reaction. But when she finally worked up the courage to tell him over breakfast one morning, his face lit up with such pure happiness that all her fears melted away. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Helena, that's the best news I could imagine. You're not worried about the timing or the expense, or I'm not worried about anything," Xavier interrupted, pulling her into his lap and kissing her soundly. "This is perfect. You're perfect. Everything is exactly as it should be." The pregnancy progressed easily, and Helena bloomed with health and happiness. Mary Henderson and the other ranch wives rallied around her with advice and support, and Xavier hovered protectively, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood and soft leather, polishing it to a golden glow. Helena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of wonder at the life growing inside her. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after Vernon Blackthorne's failed attempt to reclaim her. The labor was long and difficult, with Mary and Gray Dove the healer attending, But when Helena finally held her baby in her arms, everything else faded away. He was perfect, with Xavier's dark hair and her brown eyes, small and perfect and entirely theirs. What should we name him? She asked, exhausted and elated, watching Xavier cradle their son with careful reverence. I was thinking James after my father, Xavier said. James Turner, what do you think? It's perfect. Helena reached up to touch the baby's tiny hand, marveling at his miniature fingers. Hello, James. Welcome to your home. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a sturdy, curious little boy who followed his father everywhere. And 2 years later, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. The ranch prospered, with Xavier and his men expanding the herd and improving the land. Helena became a respected member of the community, known for her kindness and her skill at organizing social gatherings that brought the scattered ranching families together. She never heard from Vernon Blackthorne again. Occasionally, she'd get letters from her mother, carefully neutral missives that never mentioned the past. Helena replied with news of her life and children, sending photographs when they could get to Prescott to have them taken. Her mother eventually wrote that Vernon had married a railroad heiress's daughter in a lavish Charleston ceremony, and Helena felt only relief and pity for the unknown woman. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Helena with a new ring, a delicate gold band set with a small diamond he'd had specially ordered from San Francisco. I never properly courted you, he said as he slipped it onto her finger. Never gave you the romance a woman deserves. But I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You've made this house a home and my life complete. Helena looked at the ring sparkling on her finger, then at her husband's sun-weathered face, creased now with smile lines around his eyes. She thought about the terrified woman who'd stepped off that stage 5 years ago, running from violence and desperation. That woman had been looking for safety and found so much more. Love, purpose, community, and a future brighter than anything she dared to imagine. You saved my life, she said softly. When you told me to run no more, that I was safe with you forever, you gave me something I'd never had before, a real home. We saved each other, Xavier corrected, pulling her close. I was just going through the motions before you arrived. You brought joy and meaning back into my world. You made me remember what I was working for. They stood together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, James playing in the yard with his toy horses while baby Rose napped inside. The evening air was sweet with the scent of the roses Helena had planted along the porch railing, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called, wild and free. Tell me again, Helena said, leaning into Xavier's solid warmth. Tell you what, that I'm safe, that I'm home, that this is real. Xavier turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes, his expression tender. You're safe, Helena Turner. This is your home for now and always. You're my wife, the mother of my children and the love of my life. Every word is true, and every day I'll prove it to you until you never have to ask again. Helena stretched up to kiss him, pouring 5 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. I believe you, she said. Finally, completely, I believe you. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and joy. James grew tall and strong, learning the cattle business from his father with natural aptitude. Rose proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's stubborn determination, a combination that promised both trouble and greatness. When Helena was 30, she gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, who brought chaos and laughter into the household. The ranch expanded until it was one of the most successful operations in that part of Arizona territory. Xavier hired more men and built a proper bunkhouse, then later added a foreman's cottage when Rafe married and wanted to bring his bride to the ranch. The original 4-room house grew to 8 rooms, then gained a second story when the twins arrived. Helena's gardens flourished, providing not only food but beauty, with flowers blooming in profusion around the expanded porch. She became known as a healer in the community, having learned from Gray Dove over the years. Women came to her for advice on childbirth and child-rearing, for herbal remedies and comfort during difficult times. She and Mary Henderson remained close friends, their children growing up together, and Helena developed friendships with women across the territory. Xavier served several terms on the Territorial Council, helping to shape policy and advocate for ranchers' interests. He was respected throughout Arizona for his integrity and fairness, and when statehood came in 1912, he was offered a position in the new state government. But by then, he was in his late 50s, content to leave politics to younger men and focus on his ranch and family. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. James had married Clara Henderson, Mary and Ben's youngest daughter, and they had 3 children of their own. Rose had surprised everyone by marrying a lawyer from Prescott and moving to Phoenix, where she was active in the women's suffrage movement. The twins were still young men, working the ranch alongside their father and courting girls from neighboring ranches. After dinner, when the younger children were playing and the adults were sitting around talking, Helena found herself alone on the porch with Xavier, watching the familiar sunset they'd watched together thousands of times before. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked, his hand warm in hers. "Leaving Charleston, coming out here to marry a stranger?" Helena thought about it seriously, considering the question. She thought about the life she might have had if she'd stayed, married to Vernon Blackthorne or some other suitable Charleston gentleman, living a life of careful propriety and quiet desperation. She thought about all the things she'd gained by fleeing west: freedom, love, purpose, a partnership with a man who respected her, children and grandchildren who filled her days with meaning. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life with you, it's everything I never knew I wanted. You told me to run no more, that I was safe with you forever, and you've kept that promise every day for 25 years. I always will," Xavier said, lifting her hand to his lips in the old-fashioned gesture he'd never abandoned. "Until my last breath, you're safe with me." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, surrounded by the sounds of their family and the land they'd built together. Helena rested her head on Xavier's shoulder and felt the deep peace of a woman who'd found her place in the world. She'd run as far as she could, fleeing danger and desperation, and had found herself in the arms of a man who'd given her everything she'd never dared to dream of. She'd been a mail-order bride, a runaway, a woman with secrets and fears. But she'd become Helena Turner, wife and mother, healer and friend, a pillar of her community and a woman who'd finally found home. The past was truly behind her now, not forgotten but transformed into just one chapter in a much larger story. And as she sat there with Xavier, watching their grandchildren play in the twilight, she knew that the best chapters were still being written, each day adding to the legacy they were building together. Years later, when Helena was in her 70s and Xavier had passed peacefully in his sleep after a life well lived, she sat on that same porch with her great-grandchildren playing in the yard. The ranch was thriving under James's capable management, and the house was full of life and laughter. She looked at the mountains in the distance, the same mountains she'd seen that first day when she'd arrived in Piñon terrified and desperate, and she smiled. She'd been running when she came here, but Xavier had been right. She'd never needed to run again. He'd kept her safe, not just from Vernon Blackthorne, but from a life of fear and limitation. He'd given her the freedom to become the woman she was meant to be, and she'd spent their years together doing the same for him. The mail-order bride who'd been a runaway had found something far more valuable than safety. She'd found love, purpose, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And in the end, that was worth every risk she'd taken to get here. As the sun set on another Arizona day, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Helena closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Xavier, for their children and grandchildren, for the community that had embraced her, and for the wild, beautiful land that had become her truest home. She'd run no more, because she'd finally found exactly where she belonged.